So in the first video, I went through some of the background presentations on the assumptions and presuppositions from which I draft many of the premises that take place or that are of which are composed the 9 theses on the geopolitical. My name is Norman Madarasz. I'm Chief Geopolitical Officer at the Monarch Global Research Institute, linked to Monarch Switzerland. Please do press the like button, and if you find the knowledge instructive that is being presented in these videos, do subscribe to my channel, share the video, and contribute to amplifying, broadening the space of those who think critically of the geopolitical. So thesis 1. Once again, in this video, I will read the 9 theses with minimal commentary, which I will save for the next video, in which I present the background and argumentative context that give rise to the theses. Thesis 1. The truth of the geopolitical only materializes in future time, for it springs from the nature of the means of production, also known as the industrial manufacturing base of goods. Not only from the nature of the means of production, but also from who owns them and who manages them, who works for them, and who grows wealthy or poor from them. Financialization attempts to shift this truth to the present. It wields the capacity to indebt class rivals and populations, using it as a type of nuclear bomb. Thesis 2. Wealth concentration is the analog in political economy to ecocide in environmental consciousness. Ecocide refers to the general metastructural organization of the geopolitical that allows for monopolies to grow and empires to exist. In other words, there's never been a monopoly or an empire that has not been ecocide until now. We are not making any inductive claims. These are derived assertions based on historical precedent, because what appears to mark a solid break with the performance of monopolies and how they extend into imperialism is the civilizational state of the People's Republic of China. Ecocide, if we take this as describing the general condition from the perspective of environmental consciousness of the history of states hitherto, is the condition for the political West to remain hegemonic. Whether the next empire breaks with this cycle is part of a validation over which it carries out, or according to the conditions of which it can carry out true communism. Thesis 3. Within the capitalist mode of production, democracy leads to oligarchy, whether through elections or lobby groups. Within an imperialist capitalist model, political power gradually becomes exercised by foreign nationals, whose ambition is to obstruct local extraction of value from industry. These foreign national groups, some of which are part of, for example, the Israel lobby today, or there are different lobbies, such as the oil sector lobby. Each of these different lobbies include, in the present context, foreign nationals, but they also included, in the context leading up to the First World War, foreign nationals who were attempting to undermine the stability of the empire that was being channeled by monopolistic forces expressing a desire for colonial and imperial expansion. This can be seen very clearly in the case of the German Empire on the eve of the First World War. So political power seeks financial, that is, rentier gains. So the different factor, the variation that is supplemented to the production of value from the development of the manufacturing base is that it brings in, but this is part of the development of finance, I would say almost internationally, well, particularly when we see the development of a manufacturing base that is working from a territorial expense that is deprived of natural resources. This context here of scarcity of resources is context specific. You cannot universalize this notion. This is why neoclassical economic theory is undermined by a false presupposition. It may work for England, certainly did work for England in terms of describing, the state of natural resources. That's why England attempted to expand territorially and also place its population to develop as settlers in a colonialist framework in order to stimulate the production of natural resources required by the manufacturing base back home. This is evidently not the case of China, for example, today. But when the process of competition is reduced because of strategies internal to economic planning, according to the capitalist mode of production, we identify the rise of monopolies. Today, wealth concentration is the symptom of the workings of monopolies. And the working of monopolies that have not been contained by legislation passed either on the national or the international level. So monopolies eventually operate according to financial, that is, rentier gains. And as a means to provide US dollar stability, US style rentierism is prompted by trade deficits and bubbles that drive a new wealth producing mechanism, debt itself. So the moral system deriving from rentierism emphasizes meritocracy and the struggle against taxation as ultimate virtues. Meritocracy shifts attention away from how the ruling class reproduces through generations by means of legal systems often enshrined in constitutions. Struggles against taxation, by contrast, tend to reduce the latter to the enabling of corruption, while a smokescreen is produced regarding wealth concentration. So together, meritocracy and the struggle against taxation tend to justify why a political system, especially a democratic socialist one, is inherently inefficient. Corruption, though, is a function of wealth concentration, and we should not forget this. And just as corruption is a function of wealth concentration, so is the financial system that allows for tax evasion, offshore accounts, and trusts. Wealth concentration is a mindset that not only sees itself as determining social goals, it also projects itself above social law by capturing the legislative machine. The US had used debt production to effect against the US had used debt production to effect against England and France at the end of both of the global conflicts, which is a continuum seen from this perspective. There is no World War I, there's no World War II, much less a starting point and an ending point for both. Okay? There's a continuum here that's important to consider, even if one seeks to maintain the political West's historical fabrication called World War I, World War II. Not even Russia calls World War II, World War II. It's the Great Patriotic War. And for China, World War II is the war of liberation against Japanese colonization, or Japanese invasion, or Japanese aggression. So once again, the US had used debt production to effect, and it used it against England and France at the end of both of the global conflicts. Since the 1970s, a financial system benefiting creditors instead of producers has been the US strategy for striving to achieve world hegemony ever since the dollar was taken off the gold standard. Elections at the central federal level represent the interests of the oligarchy, not the people. Democracy is reduced to self-righteous moral and propagandistic virtues as lobby groups and the donor class determine who actually governs, for whom, and for what end. Politically, democracy delimited by liberalism is illegitimate. Thesis 4. To counter the ecocidal reality fostering the perpetuation of deindustrialized oligarchies, the geopolitical process can only become true again by means of a popular government with proportionate representation according to class category. However, the mechanisms of revolution have been thoroughly understood by the reactionary game theorists of liberalism. As such, egalitarian organization has to build, through rigorous study, universal education with a focus on technologies that produce environment-preserving conceptions and proposals. The rest can only follow. Thesis 5. Ecocide decreases through a socialized developmental planning defended by socialized sources of investment and a currency system hedged on the sovereign labor rights of the population, emphasizing and protecting, defending a cap that is placed on private capital gain. For the meantime, ecocide is a counter-revolutionary doctrine aimed to strike fear into an atomized workforce to whom exploitation and poverty are haunted by slavery. And it's important to emphasize here, in a comment that I will allow myself to make, that ecocide places every worker's work stability at risk if they choose to denounce how their work contributes to the ecocide. And so it's a self-contained logic here. This is why it's fundamental for a differentiated social construct to concede labor rights to workers based on the sovereignty of each regarding their salary, meaning that every employee must be paid first, and that guarantee has to be set into law, into labor legislation. As every labor can achieve such stability, this will also provide an intrinsic cap on the rise of capital gain through personal investment. In other words, private capital gain will be redistributed because private capital gain emerges or is produced by rents. It is a very core of rentierism. If it's produced by rent, it is not produced by work. So meritocracy is contradicted here as being one of the ultimate virtues of rentierism, because precisely rentierism builds its wealth from the debt incurred to others. If you call that work, you don't understand what work is. Thesis 6. For a country to become truly egalitarian, its understanding of international dominance must curtail imperialist models from recurring. So for the political West, this opportunity has already passed. The task now is to determine how it became possible again after the joint destructive drive of the 20th century world wars. Thesis 7. An egalitarian society, call it a country, is evaluated according to the results of how its means of production counter ecocide, and not by the ideological pundits who attempt to justify the operations that lead to ecocide. An egalitarian country thus corresponds to the politically true. The true is a function of variation. Egalitarianism is imminent variation, whose extension is such that it can be evaluated according to the preservation of the environment that stems from it. Thesis 8. Reverting ecocide must be the imperative measure by which an egalitarian society is deemed ethical. And to complete the second episode, Thesis 9. There is not but one name for a fully materialized egalitarian eco-ethical society. Communist socialism is doubtless one of its names. This is the end of episode 2, in which I present the 9 theses on the geopolitical. In the next episode, I will provide background to each thesis, which means that I will repeat each thesis and comment on it. Should you like to discuss any of these points with me, debate, criticize them, introduce your own, it would be a pleasure for me to converse with you. Please do not hesitate to use the email provided in the description box. Apart from that, I'm Norman Madarasz, Chief Geopolitical Officer at Monarch Global Research Institute at Monarch, Switzerland. Have a nice day.